This is Synthesis TV, keeping you on the edge of technology and business.
A very good day to you. I'm Howard Feldman, and this is Synthesis TV. The metaverse is exciting, strange, and sometimes a little bit scary, especially because we don't really know fully what it'll look like. We wanted to ask an expert. Jo Eyre is a member of Mensa here in South Africa, and in fact is the head of content and communication at Omnipresent. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's great to be here.
So it's very confusing because we obviously want to embrace new technology, but at the same time, COVID has shown us the importance of human connection, and yet the metaverse is this place that is human, isn't human. It's an avatar of ourselves. Just start at the beginning and tell us what this is.
No, it can be very confusing, and what I tend to start with when people give me those big eyes, what is this thing? Why should I care? Do I have to wear a VR headset every day? All of these questions. And I think the first step really is just understanding that it's the new version of the internet. It is the internet. So it's just perhaps a more evolved and experiential and immersive version of it, but it is just still the internet. And that's at its most basic level. That's how I describe it. And I often like to take a little step back there. And, you often hear Web3 and Metaverse used interchangeably. And whilst they're not synonymous, the technologies that are being enabled by Web3 are helping the metaverse come into being. So when we think back through these different evolutions of the internet, you think of Web 1, and this was very much just really a content delivery network. So you went there to find something. The rise of search and the like. Web 2, you think more about the creative or the co-creation side of the internet. So the social media, the fact that no longer was it just
content. It became about a social aspect and connectivity on some level.
Right, exactly. So that's when people were able to start their own brands via social media. And then with Web3, we're kind of coming to the point now where we've got you think of artificial intelligence, you think of the metaverse and metaverse technologies, more immersive experiences, but definitely more experiential and, of course, more decentralized as well. So we hear a lot about this, the decentralization via blockchain, which is an important aspect when we're talking about the metaverse as well.
Okay, so it's a natural evolution. Natural, I'm not sure, but it's a process. What are the most basic advantages that the metaverse will provide us that the current form of the internet doesn't?
That's a really good question, actually, and it's a really nice way to think about it. When we talk about the creation of the metaverse, we're often thinking about these crazy, fantastical worlds. And that's because a lot of the foundations of the metaverse have been built by the games industry. And that I used to work at Epic Games, and there's very much a lot of the early engines and early adopters were from the games industry. And so that's what our brain often goes to these crazy places. But really what we need to think about is exactly what you're saying. How can we solve the problems that we have with this new version of the internet? So with this, I like to kind of take a step back and say, so what's currently wrong with this version of the internet? I get a lot of responses. I'd be interested to hear what you think, but people often talk about big tech and the fact that we don't feel like we're in control of our own data. For example, that's one thing that comes up a lot of the time.
Right.
And
that's interesting.
The idea with the metaverse is that if it goes the way that we want it to, when I say we, I think some of the optimists working in the space, we will be in a position where individuals will have more control of their personal data because of decentralization. That's the hope, that's the wish, but we have to be very deliberate and conscious about how we create this new version of the internet and how we create the technologies that support that.
So it's interesting because for me, if I think about what would I want from this, one of the things I hate about online shopping, if, for example, is buying books. I don't enjoy the experience. I love books. I love bookshops, but I don't like buying books online. And why? Because I can't pick up the book, turn it around, feel that book to the way I want, to the extent that I want. And I keep thinking, well, if the metaverse can give me a bookshop that I can walk into and I can pick up a book off the shelf and I can have a look at the back and I can open it to read about the author and I don't need to engage in the way that I'm currently asked to engage, then for me, this whole metaverse thing is well worth it. If I can meet a friend who lives overseas for a coffee and we get the sense that we're interacting a lot more than on the screen that we are currently have to speak to each other, well, those are very real advantages, aren't they?
100%. And this is I love how you give the example of the book and that feeling of being there and feeling it and looking at it and being able to really interact with it before you buy it. And this is a beauty of the immersive part of the metaverse. When we think about the metaverse, people often do think of that immersiveness, and that's a huge part of it. And the way that people can enter those spaces is usually via VR at the moment. We do have other aspects such as augmented reality, using it through your smartphone. But if we look first at the virtual reality side that you're talking about here, I like to think of that there's what I call the three magic eyes of virtual reality. And those are immersion, interaction, and imagination. And these are things that we don't really have in this version of the internet that we're currently using. So right now, I'm talking to you via video call. And flat screens, we've been distracted by flat screens as a human species. Flat screens they were designed as display technology. They weren't designed as communication technology. And so we're used to it now. So it's fine. I can do it. And there's obviously plus sides. I can see your facial expressions a little bit more than I would if I was just, perhaps, well, I wouldn't be able to do it at all if I was on a phone call. But the problem is, and research supports this, is that it hurts our imagination, our ability to be imaginative and creative as a team, because it lowers our collective intelligence. And the reason, and I won't go into too much detail here, but the main reason here is because when we're communicating, we're trying to reach synchrony. And when we're speaking in terms of, I'm trying to look at your facial expressions, but I'm also trying to listen. And then I'm also being distracted by the fact that I'm down there, and there might be a bit of a delay. And I'm trying to see whether you want to interject. And so our prosodic communication, that's the prosody, the way that we're talking, the way that you're leaning in, it messes with
you. Can't get a sense of it. We can't mirror each other, for example. You can't read the other signs that are there, which means we've limited our communication quite significantly, actually.
Yeah. And this is the thing. And I'm not saying currently what we have in VR is not much better, if I'm honest. Right. But there's a few things that we do get with it. So on the immersion aspect, we get that feeling of co-presence. That's that psychological feeling of being together. So right now, I know that you're not next to me. Like I know that you're in another country actually at the moment. Right. And the internet, wonderful, means that I can talk to you. But I know I don't have that psychological feeling of togetherness. So you get that with virtual reality, and that's very important when you're trying to encourage collaborative creation and collaborative creativity. You need that feeling of co-presence. On the interactiveness side, that's exactly what you were talking about just now with the book. And the same happens with things when you're trying to be creative, when you're doing product physical product creation and ideation. So we imagine if we wanted to, I don't know, create a bag or something. I think of that bag right now in my head, and I'm thinking of it in 3D. And then when we end up actually physically making it, we make it in 3D. But traditionally, we've used these flat screens to see that. And it's not how our brains naturally operate. And when I'm talking about naturally, I go back all the way to our human ancestors who had to use 3D models just in order to survive. And then on the last point, the imagination side, and this is what really kind of gets my goat sometimes, because we think about our workplaces, and the last thing I miss about an office is going into a boardroom. I don't like boardrooms. I find they are...
It's so true.
Sterile.
We miss the water cooler chat. We miss chatting to people, somebody popping past and saying hi. We don't miss the boardroom. It's true.
And yet, what are people creating in the metaverse for people to work in? Boardroom.
Oh, how interesting.
Why are they doing that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why can't I go brainstorm with a team on top of a mountain? That's what I want to do. I want to sit around a campfire and talk to my team about things. That's where good ideas come. That's where good conversation doesn't happen in a boardroom. Well, certainly not for me anyway. Maybe some people love it. But research suggests that boardrooms are not conducive for good
creative space,
creative collaboration. Yeah.
So that's the one aspect, which is the immersive aspect to it. You were speaking about data. Take me through that a little bit more.
Yeah. So this is something that we're continuing to see a decentralization, and I like to talk about this not in a vacuum, because when people talk about blockchain, you immediately start thinking about currencies and things, which are important. They are likely to be, the commercial exchange in the metaverse. It's an important aspect, but it's still just one piece of the puzzle. When I think about decentralization and I think about people's data, so I was taking us through very briefly through the various iterations of the internet there, and I come from it from a communicator's point of view, a comms person, a marketing person. And I think about how we've gone from big tech being it wasn't originally big tech, it was just originally other businesses and creators at a high level that would be able to feed you information. And then we get to the point where, in theory, and there was a huge amount of optimism, especially working in Africa, that in theory, Web 2 enabled anyone to have a voice. So you could be in a rural part of, say, Kenya, and if you've got access to the internet, you could be heard, you could blog, and someone on the other end of the world could read your voice. So, but the problem with that is that you're still going through this intermediary. That intermediary is whatever social media network you're using, whatever ISP you're using, and of course, search wields a huge amount of power, because that's the lens that you can. Exactly. And this is the problem. We've got to a point now you mentioned algorithms, that we've built technology that is behaving in ways that we don't understand anymore. And that is not good.
That's definitely not good. It sounds very bad, in fact.
It could be. I mean, not necessarily. Obviously, our brains are negative, but it could be. And there's plenty of research to say that algorithms are learning to be racist. And that kind of thing is happening without us.
Wow. Yes, because to some extent, it mirrors our behavior. So if we're racist, then the algorithms will follow.
Exactly. So we didn't consciously teach it to be. But, we're the parent, if you like. And so what we're now seeing with this decentralization is that you don't have this intermediary anymore. So in the case of cryptocurrency, the bank no longer exists.
So it democratizes data and information to a large extent, much significantly more than the current version that technology allows.
Absolutely. And that's the goal. And that's the direction I think we're going in. So that's why, I don't like to be down. I love my social media networks, and I love video. I always mean about video calls, but I love them. I love what they've enabled for me, a remote worker for so long.
Right. Sure.
But I do believe that the days of big tech as we know it are numbered, and we're moving into this different era of blockchain-based decentralization, and a space where personal data is more controlled by the individual and the way that that is used.
So then is the whole Elon Musk Twitter storm just a little bit more noise that's almost irrelevant as we move towards the, as I said before, democratization of data and communication?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually. And I'd be really interested to see what how Twitter's going to evolve into this next evolution, because we do have, I mean, you never switch immediately from one to another. There's always this overlap.
Of course, it's a process.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about how much more visual this era is, how the metaverse is exceptionally visual. We already saw that shift with the kind of the with Instagram and TikTok and YouTube being more visual.
Yeah, well, again, I'd wonder that it'll be interesting to see how many younger people are going onto Twitter versus the other social media platforms, Twitter being less visual than, for example, Instagram.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'd be really interested to see how that's going to move. And I think this gets me thinking about how the various different meta worlds, if you like, the different virtual worlds within the metaverse are going to end up being formulated. And the big challenge, and this is what we don't have at the moment, is the necessity, in order to have the metaverse as we see it, as we see this world where you can hop in and out, you can move from different spaces, you need an element of interoperability between all of these different players. And we don't have that. So, for example, I shouldn't have to be doing my shopping and then leave, possibly even take my headset off, and then go back in just to go and see my friend for coffee or go to work. Like, right. That's going to work. We need to be able to move.
So these worlds need to be unified to that extent. And I guess maybe that's what we're seeing in the workplace, just bringing it back to that conversation. If we're having these Zoom type of meetings, but then we want to be able to walk through the office and talk to other people, not necessarily for a meeting. Right now, we have to end a meeting, start a meeting, end a meeting, start a meeting, inviting certain specific people in. Perhaps to some extent, what you're talking about on social media is a metaphor for how we need to start looking at our work environment through the metaverse.
Exactly. And what you're touching on here is, I think we're using old world paradigms and putting, like I used the boardroom example earlier, putting them into this new, but there are literally limitless possibilities to the kind of spaces we can create and the kind of experiences we can create within those. So we need to do exactly what you just did now and say, this is the experience I want. I want to be able to go from my meeting and go and chat to someone at their desk easily without having to move around. And that's totally possible, but we're not really doing it yet. And I think it's simply because we're taking the paradigm, the model of a video call, and putting it onto the metaverse. And that's really, it might serve a purpose, but it's not necessarily the experience that we want to have.
Right. And to some extent, we have to free ourselves from it. We are, unfortunately, out of time. And this is such a fascinating conversation. I would absolutely love to have you back on Synthesis TV, because I think this is one that is going to evolve. We're going to be contemplating, debating, and almost fighting with ourselves over as we move forward. So Jo Eyre, from Head of Content and Communication at Omnipresent, thank you for taking the time to speak to us here at Synthesis TV. Completely opened up my world, which is why I love doing this, and I greatly appreciate your time.
Thanks, Howard. It's great to chat.
I'm Howard Feldman. This has been an episode of Synthesis TV.